All right, folks. Man, I got a headache, man. I just finished talking about geopolitics and geoeconomics with a friend of mine. So, I was on a call with him, so I got a headache right now. But let's go ahead and do this. There's two main topics that Sergeant Willie P. wanted me to address. So those are going to be in the two first main sections. And hopefully those will take about 10 minutes. I think I timed them out to be about 10 minutes. Then after that, maybe 5 minutes, I'm going to do not a rant, but maybe roll over some topics and just do some plain talk. I just want to get first thing out of the way. As far as talking to Chrissy, I would never tell my daughter or any other black woman to take less than what she thinks she is worth. The only thing I'm saying about finding the best man you can is have some kind of reality-based thinking when you go and out and look. You're not going to find a perfect guy. And if you're looking for that upper middle class rich guy, you got to expect there's going to be some steep competition for that same guy from women of all colors. So I'm not saying not to be ambitious, but let's be realistic. I tell my daughter the exact same thing. The first section I'm going to do is the topic about the matriarchy in the black family that's been around for about 300 years, and the tangle of pathology that Moynihan put in his report. So that's going to be a clip from a discussion about a book from a well-known Harvard professor. And then in the second portion, we're going to talk about the decline of marriage and the decline of the human family, I would say the nuclear family, and why that is, or why I believe it is, my theory about it. And then hopefully after that, if it's not too long, I'm going to take about 5 or so minutes just to give my thoughts on the whole thing and some responses that I think maybe are necessary. But with that, let's get into it.
In doing it, Moynihan did a lot of research and reading in the writings about the black family by W.E.B. Du Bois, by Gunnar Myrdal, by Kenneth Clark, a black psychologist whose own book, Dark Ghetto, came out just as he was doing this research in early 1965 on Harlem, and especially by E. Franklin Frazier, F-R-A-Z-I-E-R, whose magnum opus, The Negro Family in the United States, was published in 1939, and which Myrdal, in his book An American Dilemma, drew fully for his passages on the black family. In fact, he solicited Frazier's help in this, and Frazier and Du Bois both read the passages in the An American Dilemma about the black family. He did a lot of historical research. He also contacted a lot of contemporary activists, Bayard Rustin in particular, Kenneth Clark, and a man named Hill, who was the labor guy for the NAACP, and others. And these are all footnoted. It was a remarkable piece of research by a person who was not a trained sociologist. He had his PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. It was on the International Labor Organization and was never published. But he was widely read, and he had information from historical sources as well as contemporary activists in it. There were no errors in it. Nobody ever criticized what his facts were. It was full of information about the contemporary situation of black families, and said a lot about the matriarchal family structure as he saw it, a heritage of slavery when marriage was illegal and women had no control over their children and men had no control over what happened to the people they had children with. He also talked a lot about what he called a startling increase in welfare dependency. He featured what later became known as Moynihan's scissors. He showed that up until the very early 60s, there was a strong correlation if you look at me, chart showing the rate of black male non-white unemployment. It was called then. The census didn't take blacks out. Non-white unemployment. Most of these were black, and the welfare take up with aid to family Aid to Families with Dependent Children, AFDC program. And this was parallel. Then, starting in the early 60s, the unemployment rate, these were good years, starts to go down a little bit. It goes like this. There's a scissors here. So he says something's happening here. The illegitimacy rate is going up, or ratio, we should call it. It's not the rate. The percentage of births that are out of wedlock is going up, and unemployment is not going up quite so fast. Something else is happening. It's not just economics. Something deeper is happening to the black family. And he had a longest chapter near the end called The Tangle of Pathology, which left the impression, of course, that this was a desperate situation and that blacks in these lower class families were living in a pathological situation. This was a liberal document, however. He started by saying that the reasons blacks have so much problem is because there is a racist virus in the American bloodstream. Describing the history of blacks in the United States, he said that they had suffered from, quote, 3 centuries of unimaginable mistreatment. There was not the slightest suggestion in here that Moynihan was regarding blacks having children out of wedlock as acting immorally. It was not a moralistic document. In fact, it was not even an uplifting document. He didn't, praise, for instance, the capacity of blacks to deal with all of this, as some people did with kin relationships. He thought to do that would make it seem as if he thought this was the answer, which he didn't. What he said, in fact, was not particularly striking to anybody who really knew what the situation was. Kenneth Clark's book, Dark Ghetto, for instance, said very much the same things as Moynihan did. In fact, the phrase tangle of pathology was Clark's. Clark was a black psychologist. Moynihan was a Catholic white guy, a messenger carrying bad news. And you know about messengers, right? They get in trouble sometimes just because they're messengers.
Okay, this is the professor on his board. We're gonna deal with this now. This is from the Moynihan Report, or the Negro American Family, and we're talking. In the clip we're talking about the tangle of pathology. So we're gonna read from the text right now. We can skip down. It says the Negro community has not only survived, but in this political generation has entered national affairs as a moderate, humane, and constructive national force, is the highest testament to the healing powers of the democratic ideal and the creative vitality of the Negro people. But it may not be supposed that the Negro American community has not paid a fearful price for the incredible mistreatment to which it has been subjected over the past 3 centuries. In essence, the Negro community has been forced, say it with me now, been forced into a matriarchal structure, which, because it is so out of line with the rest of the American society, seriously retards the progress of the group as a whole and imposes a crushing burden on the Negro male, and in consequence on a great many Negro women as well. This is presumably no special reason why a society in which males are dominant in family relationships is to be preferred a matriarchal arrangement. However, it is clearly a disadvantage for a minority group to be operating on one principle, while the great majority of the population, and the one with the most advantages to begin with, is operating on another. This is the present situation of the Negro. Ours is a society which presumes male leadership in private and public affairs. The arrangements of the society facilitate such leadership and reward it. as a subculture, which I've already said, the black community is a subculture such as that of the Negro American, in which this is not the pattern, is placed at a distinct disadvantage. It might be estimated that as much as half of the Negro community falls into the middle class. However, the remaining half is in desperate and deteriorating circumstances. Moreover, because of housing segregation, it is immensely difficult for the stable half to escape from the cultural influence of the unstable one. The children of middle-class Negroes often as not must grow up in or next to the slums and experience almost unknown to white middle-class children. They are therefore constantly exposed to the pathology of the disturbed group and constantly in danger of being drawn into it. It is for this reason that the propositions put forth in this study may be thought of as having more or less general application. In a word, most Negro youth are in danger of being caught up in the tangle of pathology that affects their world, and probably a majority are so entrapped. Many of those who escape do so for one generation only. That's for all these patriarchal middle class people that think they've escaped. As things are now, their children may have to run the gauntlet all over again. That is not the least vicious aspect of the world that white America has made for the Negro. Skipping down, a fundamental fact of Negro American life is that often reverse roles of husband and wife. Robert O. Blood Jr., Donald M. Wolfe, in a study of Detroit families, note that Negro husbands have unusually low power. And while this is a characteristic of all low-income families, the pattern pervades the Negro social structure. The matriarchal pattern of so many Negro families reinforces itself over the generations. This process begins with education, although the gap appears to be closing at the moment. For a long while, Negro females were better educated than Negro males, and this remains true today for the Negro population as a whole. As low as the aspirational level amongst lower-class Negro girls, it is considerably higher amongst the boys. For example, I have examined the honor rolls in Negro high schools for about 10 years. As a rule, from 75 to 90% of all Negro honor students are girls. Now, here's the kicker, and I want Sergeant Willie Pete to pay special attention to this one, because I've been told this over and over by many, many people. I've seen this in my own life. I've heard this from my buddies, and I've also heard this on YouTube from many a black men. Historically, in the matriarchal Negro society, mothers made sure that if one of their children had a chance for higher education, the daughter was the one to pursue it. The effect on family functioning and role performance of this historical experience, economic deprivation, is what you might predict. But as a husband and as a father, the Negro male is made to feel inadequate, not because he is unlovable or unaffectionate, lacks intelligence, or even a gray flannel suit. In other words, it doesn't matter about his status. But in society that measures a man by the size of his paycheck, he doesn't stand very tall in comparison with his white counterpart. To this situation, he may react with withdrawal, bitterness towards society, aggression, both within the family and racial group, self-hatred or crime, or he may escape through a number of avenues that help him lose himself in fantasy or to compensate for his low status through a variety of exploits. Doesn't this sound an awful lot like what's going on today? Okay, for the most part, modern marriage as we know it has its antecedents going all the way back 10,000 years to the beginning of the agricultural age. Its sole purpose is to assign a man or a man's labor to a family for the sole reason of producing children that the society needs or the tribe needs, whatever the human unit was. Now, it's taken many different variations on the same thing, but marriage basically is still basically the same form that it was 10,000 years ago. The production, the care and feeding of the human resources that human society needed. Because of high mortality rates, a human female needed to produce as many children as she could. Because if she didn't, eventually that people would starve and die out without that human labor from young people coming up. Obviously, what made this break was the Industrial Revolution, because what it did was divorce human labor from human production, because the machines that people built, or that our culture built, was a lot faster and more efficient at producing some of the same things. Farming, textiles, and other goods that people depended on. It also produced new tools that made the work of labor more efficient. So, starting in 1780, when the Industrial Revolution actually got going in northern Scotland, it started to replace people. And as it started to replace people, the need for the female fertility rate and her to produce as many children as possible started to go down. Okay, here's a chart of the total fertility rate of France and England, and pay particularly close attention to England, where the Industrial Revolution started. You can see as more food is available, you can see the increase of fertility at the beginning, but as the Industrial Revolution took hold, you can see the rapid drop in the fertility rates of females. You can see England's fertility rate drop from over 6 down to 2, which is barely replacement level. Here's a chart that's a little closer to home and maybe a little bit more familiar. We have the black and white fertility chart from 1800 on into the 21st century. It didn't surprise you that you see the same pattern that you see in England, or the English chart. The white women, as the country industrialized, you can see the fertility rate drop dramatically from 7 children per woman all the way down to less than 2, which is below replacement. You see the same thing for black females, which were recorded coming out of slavery. The fertility rate is about a child higher, and it remains so for quite some time. But eventually, as their per capita income caught up with, or became in sync with white women, their drop happened dramatically as well. You can see it's juxtaposed against the per capita income of the United States. And as the wealth of the country increases, the wealth of the people increases, the female fertility rate goes down or plummets. And it's obvious, you can see that it's inversely proportional to the fertility rate. In other words, you don't need children. Women don't need to produce children anymore. It's not a necessity as it was back in the 18th century and before. What is the original reason for marriage? Is assigning a man's labor to a woman so that they can produce children or human resources that the society needs. What happens when the society does not need children? If this chart is any indicator, children aren't produced. So it would make sense that eventually the institution that was set up for the production of children would also see a similar effect. Now, it was difficult for me to find a historical marriage chart by itself, but this is what I did find, and it is interesting in itself. Here you can see that marriage since the Industrial Revolution, and as far back as I could find, it was 1860, but it will do, is basically flat, with a couple of post-war spikes in 1920, which is a slight one, and then the big one, which was the post-war after 1940, after 1945. You saw a big spike right around there. Now you have some dips during the Depression, and then the post-baby boom dip in the 60s. It's flat again in the 70s and 80s, and then its really steep decline, which is pretty much a similar picture all over the world. I could show you more charts, but I think this one will be sufficient. But look below it at the divorce rate chart, in blue. Divorce is tiny, almost non-existent until the Depression. And then it becomes relevant. And then it becomes really relevant after 1970. Next chart, we're going to take a closer look at the divorce rate. Now, this chart probably doesn't need any introduction. You can see that divorce in the U.S. was almost non-existent for the most part until after the Great Depression. And then you had an explosion after the laws were changed during the Great Depression of divorce. And that explosion didn't stop until after World War II, when the troops came back from World War II and started to marry, and America had a golden age because basically it ruled the world. And that was fine again until the law started to change in the 60s. And then you had another huge explosion under no-fault divorce, probably the biggest ever. And that didn't abate until the 1980s, where things started to taper off. And I would probably suspect, and I do believe it's correct, that the only reason that it tapered off is because the marriage rate went down. Here's an interesting one. It's basically the same charts that you saw before, but it's juxtaposed against the two world wars and the legislation as far as divorce is concerned. And it shows you how not only the environment, the world wars, but also the policies that the United States passed affected not marriage and divorce. You can look at it. The divorce was almost non-existent until the Matrimonial Causes Act was passed in 1937. And you can see the upward trend since then. And it's basically the same until the explosion with the divorce reform or no-fault divorce. And like I said, the only thing that brought or leveled divorces out was the decline in marriage, the decline in matrimony. When you look at it from this perspective and you bundle all these things together and you start to connect the dots, you can see the effect that your environment, or the artificial environment that the Industrial Revolution created, drastically affect what people do. And it affects the dynamics between male and female, because the dynamics between male and female depend on children. Without that to bind them together, and without society's pressure to keep them together, they won't stay together. They're going to split up. You're going to have a divided family. You can see, even though the Matrimonial Causes Act was passed in 1937, divorce was still rather flat until women entered the workforce and they had their own money. The same can be said in 1960. In the mid-60s, when more women went to college and more women went to work, the divorce rate spiked up. And then when you change the laws once more and make it easier, what's inside of her really spikes up, and it really shows up. So nowadays, when you have nothing to bind these two people together, you don't have children, you don't have economics, and you don't have societal pressure, what's going to happen to marriage? It's becoming almost non-existent all over the world, especially in the industrialized world. Marriage is not a natural phenomena. It is a human instrument that became an institution. It is there for a purpose. And when that purpose is no longer there, the instrument and the institution will cease to exist, and something else will rise up in its place. So nowadays, marriage is a choice. It's a luxury. It's not a necessity like it used to be. Which is all I was saying, especially in this environment, which is all I tell my daughter, and it's what I told Chrissy, basically the same thing. This is what you're looking at. Okay, in conclusion, the reason I'm on YouTube and the reason I even got this channel is because after about 15 years of being involved with folks, with politics and even economics of black folks and the black community, trying to figure it out and even coming up with some solutions, it finally dawned on me, as it probably dawned on Monahan, that there was something else going on. Black folks weren't taking the solutions and applying them. They weren't moving. They weren't seeing the value in these solutions. So I knew there was something else going on. And then reading the Monahan report and hearing about it, it was that aha moment when you find the answer and you go, oh shit, I should have seen this from the beginning. And it's what Monahan calls it. It's the tangle of pathology, of cultural pathology. Some call it post-traumatic slave syndrome, but they never ever describe it in a way that you can get your hooks into it, because they talk about it through psychology and not culture. Black folks have become politically correct, and we don't own up to our own bullshit. Like my partner, who's been in the game as far as black folks are concerned for about 40 years, he's been telling me for the last 20, 98% of all black folks need to be lying on somebody else's couch to get rid of all this cultural bullshit that we have going through our heads. We've been in this tangle and web of pathology for so long, we've gotten comfortable in it. And been on YouTube, I'm hearing the same crap, the same bullshit I've been hearing for the last 30 years, going back and forth and circulating. And nobody ever cuts that Gordian knot and finds out what's at the bottom of this. And when people do find out what's at the bottom of this, black folks don't want to accept it. Now, when I do my series on the Monahan Report, I'm going to get deeper into this, and I'm going to bring some other sources into this. But for right now, we're going to pause this and we're going to talk about other things. SWP talks about solutions in the black community. There are tons and tons and tons of things that you can do in the black community. He keeps saying we need a whole lot of money. We need businesses. While we do need businesses, we need to convince black people into supporting those businesses, which is at the heart of why there's not a lot of black businesses in the first place. That goes back to cultural psychology and the pathology that we carry within us. You fix the culture, you fix the people. I'm going to even talk about what's going on in his hometown of Philadelphia. A member of our group, she's in Philadelphia. She's been a teacher for, 35 years. She's working on the Philadelphia school system, trying to get not only black children taught better, but the kids that are coming out of prison or out of lockup educated to where they can be productive members of the community. And if I'm not mistaken, they spend upwards of $25,000 per student in the Philadelphia school system. And only about 15% of that goes into the classroom where kids to be taught. But she got mad at me when I told her that poor women, especially poor women that really aren't working and are at home most of the time, have the tools and have the ability to teach their own children. With the internet, YouTube, and Khan Learning Academy, distance learning, and a whole bunch of other things, and a $50 tablet, you can basically teach your own child and give them a quality education. The Philadelphia school system can supplement it. You could cut the Philadelphia school system budget in half, practically per student, and still get a better education and a better outcome. And if the poor women have to educate their children and look at those lessons every day, guess what's going to happen? She's going to be educated too. She can be educated and trained through the same system to give her children a quality education. And that will give the whole city of Philadelphia a better outcome. Then you can use the money that's left over to start giving these poor adult kids or these poor adult men trades. Open up trade schools. Give them apprenticeships. As black folks are wont to do, they're highly, highly resistant to any solution that you might come up with. People always say, black folks, we need a whole lot of money in the black community. There's tons of money in the black community. There's tons and tons of resources in the black community. But in the state that the black people's minds are, they want to be handheld. They want to be comfortable. They want what's familiar. In our group, we come up with tons and tons of solutions for people, and we keep getting the same answers back why they can't do something. The problem is not money. The problem is not businesses. The problem is that tangled web of pathology, cultural pathology that we have and are running through our veins and running through our heads. You figure that out, you fix the people, you fix the people's culture, the black community will have the ability to fix itself. There's no way that you can be in the richest country on the planet and not have resources around you. Impossible. There's a local girl in Los Angeles that was homeless her entire life, never went to one school for 2 consecutive years in a row. She set her black behind in the library for 12 years with the resources she had. And she had 20 schools chasing her for free. She picked Harvard. So that lack of money is bullshit. Black women and black men, get off your ass and go get it. Black women, if you can't do it, give those children to those men and let them go get it. If you can't do it, move the hell out the way and let other people do it. Okay. That's all. This is getting long, so that's all I'm going to say on this piece. I hope this answers your question. This is BGS out.